Dear listeners, many of my readers have been asking about the anonymity of the Gambian characters in my book, Testimony of a Gambian Military Officer and Diplomat. I therefore want to take a moment to clarify this. For those who may have missed my earlier explanation or didn't quite grasp it, in the opening session titled The Prologue, I disclose my reasons for keeping the names of Gambian characters confidential. This decision, I said, stems from the close-knit nature of the Gambia, where nearly everyone knows everyone else. I made this choice out of respect, as some individuals mentioned in the first book published in the United States of America in 2007 by Ex Libris Publishing House did not appreciate being included. They were unhappy that I hadn't sought their permission beforehand. I don't want to make the same mistake in this revised edition, which continues the original story from 2000 to 2023 after the previous government was replaced. However, once again, please understand that while I change the names of the Gambian characters, the core events are based on real experiences. In contrast, foreign acquaintances mentioned in the book are referred to by their actual names as a tribute to the historic relations forged during those critical moments. For instance, Nigerian military personnel in the Gambian National Army and members of the British Army training team all retain their real names. Furthermore, the real names of my family members in the previous and current books have been retained, including, of course, my name, Captain, then Major, and finally, Lt Colonel Samsudeen Sarr. In essence, the events and facts remain unchanged. Hence, if anyone is really obsessed with unveiling the true names of the characters, all that one has to do is to connect the dots and factor the timeline to uncover who they actually are. After all, if any of my keen followers familiar with events of the 1994 military takeover cannot still figure out who the chairman of the AFPRC, Lieutenant Haja J.J.A. Jane, or Vice Chairman Kending Singate, or Defense Minister Edmond Samate, or PPP President Sir Dembo Jawla are, then that person has obviously not been understanding what I have been reading in both the English and Wolof languages. Now, let's continue our reading from chapter 9, titled First Working Day of the AFPRC Government. Today is Wednesday, the 25th of October, 2023. I am retired Lt Colonel Samsudeen Sarr, former commander of the Gambian National Army and the author. So let's begin. Chapter 9. First working day of the AFPRC government. On Monday, July 25th, a momentous day unfolded. Virtually every civil servant, from department heads to business affiliations, and even those employed within the State House, heeded the soldiers' call to report for duty. Permanent secretaries, deputy permanent secretaries, directors, clerks, and even the cooks who had served under deposed President Jaula converged at the State House to ascertain the identity of the new figure who now held sway within the palace. In the early hours, a press conference organized by council members took place. While I abstained from attending, Captain Charin was in attendance. Meanwhile, the former Inspector General of Police Sila Jagana returned from Dhaka, Senegal that afternoon, but was instantly arrested and confined to Mile 2 Central Prisons by Singate and Topper. This puzzling course of action starkly negated the principles enunciated by Chairman Jane in his maiden speech to the whole world, particularly his commitment to treating all citizens equitably and impartially, devoid of prejudice or harm to their well-being and that of their families. Amidst the preparation by the State House civilian protocol for the impending press conference, I ventured into the office of Mr. Saul Mam Jaha, my permanent secretary at the Defense Ministry. Surprisingly, he reported for work that day. Our encounter marked our first informal discussion since the coup. Mr. Jaha was entrusted with the task of composing a written press release announcing the immediate reopening of our land, sea, and air borders, which had been temporarily shuttered for security considerations. Beyond the official duty, I harbored an earnest desire to engage Mr. Jaha in a personal conversation. Our last interaction had taken place at Yundum Barracks, an encounter that had a tinge of reluctance or even detainment to it. He had been confined alongside Mr. K.M.O. Sise, the Director General of the National Security Services, known as the NSS. It was my assumption that Mr. Jaha had been transferred along with others to the national prisons following Second Lieutenant Singate's declaration of such a move. Evidently, the coup leaders, or better put, Singate, had honed in on members of the security forces, sparing the civilians and the Nigerian soldiers. In light of the coup's unfolding, it appeared logical to detain and interrogate officials who played important roles within the PPP government ministers, institutional heads, and their immediate aides, as opposed to the Gambian soldiers and police officers who were uninvolved in the preceding administration's affairs and remain unaware of any underlying machinations. Alternatively, if civilian status rendered politicians and technocrats immune to the junta's persecution, a question arises as to why the Nigerian senior officers who held significant sway over the establishment were exempted from scrutiny. In the context of drafting the press release, Mr. Jaha proved exceedingly cooperative. I endeavored to initiate a conversation about the broader coup scenario and its driving factors, yet his response lacked enthusiasm or curiosity. It is plausible that he still perceived me as an emissary, despite to gauge his sentiments. Or perhaps he has sensed my impending challenge over his doubts about me that had lingered since my time working under his authority. Still, I couldn't fathom why he chose to keep me in the shadows, even after being informed about the clandestine coup plot at Yundum Barracks a week earlier. It struck me that I wanted to remind Mr. Jaha of a rather embarrassing incident 6 months earlier, a time when I had taken the initiative to compose a report or a recommendation addressing the alarming and perilous state of the Gambian National Army soldiers. In the report, I underscored the transformative impact of hiring Nigerian military experts who had indeed effectively revolutionized the army from its previously mismanaged British-led form to a well-structured force with newly established administrative branches that were vital for its efficiency, areas that the British Army training team had previously neglected. The changes I wrote had undeniably streamlined army operations, particularly for the Nigerians who bore abundance of responsibilities ranging from policy formulation to training directives. Yet, the ordinary Gambian soldiers found themselves stagnating in mundane routines, endless guard duties, ceremonial parades, and monotonous combat and weapon drills that seemed devoid of purpose. The plight of the young officers and soldiers stationed at Yundum Barracks was particularly disheartening. Highly trained but confined to mind-numbing activities they despised. They sought solace in cups of Chinese tea's attire, and regrettably with a few turning to substance like marijuana, all while nurturing dreams of a more fulfilling future elsewhere. During the era of the Senegalese presence in the Gambia, the prospect of serving in the Confederation Army had ignited an unparalleled motivation among the soldiers. The subsequent ECOMOG peacekeeping mission in Liberia had momentarily injected a new sense of purpose after the Senegalese departure. But the way and manner their first peacekeeping operation had ultimately unraveled exacerbated the pre-existing difficulties faced by the soldiers. Despite the Nigerian intervention's efforts to rectify the situation, a critical oversight remained glaring. An abundance of idle soldiers within the ranks who had undergone rigorous training across diverse military principles. Introducing a standardized merit-based training and evaluation system for both officers and soldiers, designed to organize the nominal roll according to seniority and grounded in the principles followed by modern armies, could have alleviated the chronic issues plaguing the Gambian National Army. The prevailing practices of promotion based solely on enlistment date, with little regard for academic qualifications, seem not only absurd, but also counterproductive in the long run. It was perplexing to fathom why General Dada remained unable to alter the dire policy inherited from the antiquated pre-colonial Gambia field force system. Indeed, the situation improved slightly when General Dada decided to adopt the initiative of reducing the excessive deployment of Gambian National Army company sizes of 150 troops to Liberia rather than a section of 12 or 13 soldiers that he believed was a major contributing catalyst behind the soldiers' past rebellions in 1990 and 1991 against the government. However, it was factual that throughout Africa, the United Nations extended substantial and enticing peacekeeping opportunities to willing and capable armies such as the Gambian National Army, which could have alleviated their boredom and enhanced their earnings. I indicated in the paper how the post-Cold War era had revolutionized the roles of modern conventional armies globally. In this context, I, as the principal staff officer at the Ministry of Defense headquarters, candidly recommended that the Gambian National Army should be involved in international peacekeeping operations immediately. That will not only bestow more meaningful career, but also deter them from venturing into reckless exploits. In my capacity, I believe I could honestly convey this perspective. I distributed the paper among various officials, including those at the President's office, the Army headquarters, and the Office of the President's permanent secretaries. A few days elapsed before an invitation arrived from the senior permanent secretary at the President's office, Mr. Musa. Unbeknownst to me, he was President Jawla's nephew and held a close relationship with him. During the meeting, I maintained that the message within my paper was self-evident. However, Mr. Musa, devoid of restraint, delivered a stinging critique of my writing style. He highlighted few spelling errors I had overlooked and coldly dismissed my notion that the government required my counsel from me on managing the GNA. Let me correct that. I misplaced the wrong word there. It should be, he highlighted few spelling errors I had overlooked and coldly dismissed any notion that the government required any counsel from me on managing the GNA. You are merely a captain, he asserted. We have generals and colonels to guide us. If you possess astute ideas, kindly share them with your peers or juniors. Refrain from submitting them here. He returned the paper to me and requested my departure immediately. Subsequently, Mr. Jangha did not mention the subject or even acknowledge receipt of the paper. Yet his deputy, Mr. G.O. Silva, invited me to his office, ostensibly under the influence of his boss. Mr. Silva adopted a more diplomatic approach during our conversation. Government departments do not operate in this way, Captain, he said. Submitting opinionated papers to authorities suggesting that you possess superior insight in their management is not conducive to effective governance. People who engage in such actions are often characterized as mere opportunists seeking unwarranted promotions, he said. I spontaneously interjected, disputing his judgment. Undoubtedly, I know your intentions are sincere, he continued, his tone understanding. However, as I mentioned before, we don't welcome such advice, regardless of its truthfulness or value. Communicating with Mr. Silla was much smoother than with Mr. Jangha. I find myself wishing Mr. Silla could have been present after the coup for further discussions. Regrettably, he was in the United States participating in an advanced course on military-civilian relationship. It was a scholarship originally meant for the Gambian National Army captain or a major to attend in the United States, but the Nigerians, in their perpetual battle with the American embassy staff in the country, responded with their recent rejections of most U.S. courses by stating how no one in the Gambian National Army was qualified enough for the training. That was the reason the ministry selected Deputy Permanent Secretary Silla to attend the course. Mr. Jangha on that morning, Monday morning, the 25th of July, promptly wrote the press release about opening the borders and sent it to all radio stations for immediate broadcast. Shortly after leaving Mr. Jangha's office, a call came through from the United States. It was the Gambian National Army officers attending military courses there. A major, a captain, and 2 lieutenants were attending courses in America. Like mentioned above, Mr. G.O. Silla, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Defense, was also attending a course there. All the scholarships will be revoked by the U.S. government once Washington finally confirmed the validity of the coup and the refusal of the soldiers to restore the PPP government. However, with little concrete information available at the time, I advised them to continue their studies and maintain communication as the country gradually stabilized. There was little or nothing I could offer in terms of guidance for the officers training in the United States. Mr. Andrew Winters and James Knight made a final visit to the State House that morning, urging me to convince Chairman GNA and his associates to consider the far-reaching consequences of the coup on the nation's political, economic, and social fabric. The soldiers remaining in power after overthrowing President Jawla's democratically elected government will be both painful and regrettable, Ambassador Winters emphasized. With a touch of helplessness, I replied, I am afraid I no longer have much to say on the matter, sir, especially given Samate's firm stance. Ambassador Winters displayed visible frustration, apparently for his failed initiative. He stood momentarily in silence, hands in his pockets, before departing alongside Mr. Knight. They will come to regret this decision, he declared, his parting words hanging in the air. Following the hour-long press conference, Captain Charret once again approached me and we briefly discussed our ministerial appointments. I was unsure of my next step as a minister. I acknowledge that the ministers in the previous PPP government were better known for their political prowess than their technical or intellectual expertise. They excelled in mobilization, propaganda, and oratory in various local dialects. Despite the generally modest educational backgrounds of most PPP ministers, with a few notable exceptions, their remarkable political sharpness shone through. They possess the knack for swaying public sentiments, even when resorting to blatant falsehoods. As I contemplated the prospect of stepping into their shoes, I found myself embracing the appointed position without any reservation. In fact, the appointment to ministerial office filled me with joy, setting my thoughts racing about the impending responsibilities. But I took the opportunity to propose an important endeavor, a mission to Liberia aimed at repatriating the remains of our fallen soldiers, Corporal Langbanjang and Private Selu Chalo. I believe that bringing them back home and granting them an honorable burial in their homeland was a fitting tribute. I am convinced that this tragedy could provide a sense of closure for their comrades in the military and their grieving families, who understandably still wish for their final resting place to be within our borders rather than Liberia. I elaborated, articulating my reasons. I further conveyed how this mission could inject meaning into the toppling of the oppressive government that had subjected the soldiers to a decade of cruelty and indifference. Both Samate and Charen lent their support to the proposition. However, due to their ongoing efforts to connect with other Gambian civilians appointed to ministerial roles, they suggested postponing the matter for a later discussion. Although contact with prospective minister Mr. Babukar Banja Drame remained elusive, his position as the finance minister appeared solidified. Curiously, a sense of affection seemed to envelop the former vice president and finance minister, with many eager for his swift acceptance of the role and return to the Gambia from Dhaka. Numerous Gambians had yearned for his ascendancy to the presidency when Sir Dembo's controversial retirement was announced in 1992. Accordingly, the urban middle class, including the so-called Banjul Mafia Club, had harbored reservations about Mr. Drame's leadership, fearing the potential loss of their privileges and standing enjoyed during President Jawla's PPP government. To recount, His Excellency Babukar Banja Drame had held the vice presidential post up to 1992 when President Jawla initiated a theoretical departure from politics. Those who entertained the notion of Jawla's serious exit had anticipated Mr. Drame's swift succession. Rather than seeking to dissuade his superior's decision, Drame was reported to have set in motion preparations for his future government as rumored. Instead, it was Mr. Suku Samate, then the finance minister, who took the trouble of assembling the nation's religious leaders at the State House. Their collective appeal to President Jawla to reconsider his decision bore fruit, convincing him that divine will mandated his continued leadership. The episode clearly demonstrated that Jawla's announcement had been a calculated maneuver, perhaps aimed at gauging his popularity within the party and the nation at large. Because the following unprecedented sequences of political changes unfolded. Vice President Babukar B. Drame was demoted to the position of finance minister, while Honorable Suko Samate replaced him as the new vice president. This reshuffling of roles triggered a tense dynamic between the two men as their portfolios were swapped. Nationally, Mr. Babukar B. Drame was widely regarded as a genuine politician, while Mr. Samate earned the reputation of a mere sycophant to President Jawla. The young officers who had seized power from the PPP government believed that Mr. Drame, due to his background, would be the most suitable choice as the Minister of Finance in their new administration. Additionally, There were other civilian politicians who were considered for ministerial roles. Mr. Mbaisila and Mr. Sadia Jara of this Doi political party were among those recommended, but both declined the offers. Their refusal was, according to witnesses, based on their principled opposition to the coup d'etat that had brought about the change in the government, despite their long-standing disagreement and opposition to the PPP government and its leadership. Although I must confess my absence during the negotiation with the Doi leaders. It was reported that Mr. Sekou Sane, the then permanent secretary at the Ministry of External Affairs and others, had accepted their appointment as ministers. The Ministry of Education was entrusted to Mrs. Sarata Jau, an experienced female educationist. While most appointees were informed of their selection and were pending acceptance, only Mr. Babukar Drame's case, who was still with President Dembo Jawla in Dakar, remained unconfirmed but that Monday. Captain Charen had reached out to all appointees to convey the news and sought their acceptance, who indeed accepted. A swearing-in ceremony was scheduled for Wednesday, 27 July 1994 at 9 a.m. at the State House. Later that day, I had another meeting with Chairman Chane to discuss my upcoming trip to Liberia, which he also endorsed wholeheartedly as a positive idea. However, when I attempted to communicate with Singate and Topper about the trip, I learned that they were busy in the streets searching for police and military officers to arrest and detain. It is worth noting that Captain Sane, Mamadi Sane, and Captain Demcharen were also detained together on the 25th, a result of actions taken by Singate and Topper, marking the imprisonment of several GNA officers at gunpoint. Major Mahdi Job's arrival at the State House marked an important moment as he stepped into the role of the new Inspector General of Police, a position we were eager to see fill, given concerns about the disarray within the police force. Chairman Jani preferred him to anyone else and was invited to be formally informed about his appointment. Upon being offered the position, Mr. Job took a considered approach for seeking the counsel of his brother, retired Colonel Mamadi Faye Job, the former Gambian National Army commander until 1990, and the current Gambia ambassador to France. After thoughtful deliberation, his brother gave his blessing to the appointment and advised him to accept the job. Jane, wasting no time, urged Major Job to assume his responsibilities immediately, and call that Major Job readily heeded. A call that Major Job readily heeded. On Tuesday, the 26th of July, I made my way to my designated office at the Ministry of Trade and Industry in Banjul. The permanent secretary there was Mr. Jagana, warmly greeted me upon my arrival. He graciously took me on a tour of the offices, including the office and workplace of the former minister. Mr. Jagana introduced me to the ministry staff, and while they appeared expectant, I found myself at a loss for words. As a newcomer to the ministerial role, I struggled to articulate my intentions and goals. Uncertain about their expectations, I finally mustered a few sentences focusing on the underlying reasons for the coup. The PPP government, I explained, failed to acknowledge the sacrifices of soldiers like us. Their lack of respect, driven by their perceived superiority, left us feeling marginalized and disregarded. I recounted the plight of fallen soldiers in Liberia and questioned the morality of abandoning their remains. My sentiments resonated with the staff, all of whom expressed their shared indignation. By the coming week, I assured them, steps will be taken to repatriate the valiant soldiers and provide them a proper resting place in their own country. On the political front, I assured them the commitment of the AFPRC government to a new constitution introducing term limit of 2 terms of 5 years for all elected presidents to avoid what happened with the PPP government. 10 years, I told them, was enough time for an African president to do everything he can do for his country and give chance to a new leader. I have wholeheartedly believed in the concept as a cardinal deterrent of military coups and armed insurgencies. Leaving the office, I headed to Serekunda to visit my mother. En route, I encountered Captain Rahim Kaba, a Gambian National Army officer whom GNA had ordered arrested earlier that day. The reason behind the arrest was Kaba's perceived failure to accord GNA the respect he deserved due to the support the captain had received from the Nigerian Army Training Assistant Group Command. I cautioned Kaba to avoid interaction with officers like Singate, Topa, or even Jane. Seeing the wisdom in this advice, he requested to accompany me to Serekunda. Together we made our way to my mother's residence. Our arrival was met with jubilation and excitement. My mother, wanting to ensure my well-being, offered me a juju she had obtained from a marabout the day before. Despite her insistence, I opted to place it in my pocket rather than wear it on my arm. It is not for your pocket, he reminded me. It's meant to be worn close to your arm. Though I had reservations about wearing a juju, I followed her guidance and placed it in my pocket, bringing a smile to her face. Before returning to Banjul, I drove to my residence to visit my wife and children, with Captain Kaba still accompanying me. Our journey back to Banjul culminated in a meeting between Captain Kaba and Chairman Jane, where an unexpected sense of civility and reconciliation prevailed, despite all the previous tension between them. Kaba left me there, and I stayed with the chairman, discussing the woman in Brikama until late in the night. His determination to pursue the woman of his dream was evident. Finally, we reached an agreement that we will take action the next day to establish contact with the girl. The last significant incident that occurred before I departed from the State House that night involves a report from a Gambian National Army non-commissioned officer revealing that Lieutenant Sang Boto Jamba was undermining the coup effort at the Fajara barracks. One could recall that Jamba held the position of second in command within President Chawla's Presidential Guard unit and had played a crucial role in diffusing tensions between the mutinous soldiers and the state guard troops on the afternoon of the coup. It therefore seemed counterintuitive that Jamba, who had been instrumental in maintaining stability up to that point, will now act otherwise. Responding swiftly, Jane ordered Jamba's immediate arrest and detention. However, before the order was transmitted for execution by Singate and Topper, Lieutenant Jamba arrived at the State House to provide his explanation. He vehemently denied the allegations, offering a convincing defense of his innocence. Jamba attributed the accusation on prejudice by the GNA soldiers due to his previous membership to the Presidential Guards. Actually, based on his actions since Friday, it was clear that Lieutenant Jamba had been actively contributing to stabilizing the situation. Jamba's verbal arrest warrant was rescinded as promptly as it had been issued. Chairman Jane extended his advice to Jamba, urging him to continue his commendable efforts and to avoid any conflicts with the Gambian National Army soldiers. Jani demonstrated genuine sympathy towards his former colleague from the Presidential Guard unit, where they both served together in the past. He made a point to differentiate Jamba from the undesirable individuals who had previously been part of the unit. Major Sute Banja, he added, was unjust and unkind to me. He displayed tribalistic tendencies and survived primarily because of his familiar ties to President Chowda. Pabi is his uncle. I am pleased he is now in custody, where his uncle's influence can't protect him. That is how I came to know that Major Banja was also apprehended and detained on Jane's orders that day. It was my belief that Singate's team had carried out the arrest. As the evening descended, I left the State House to return home. And that ends chapter 9. Till Friday, I will be back to read chapter 10. Have a nice day, folks.